Good evening and welcome to the studio this evening. Let's start by just doing something about this lighting. There we go. That effect is caused by the fact that the light was dimmed slightly. It does that by turning it on and off very rapidly. Let me give you, the camera, a little hat so you don't get the glare off the light. And we're ready to continue doing some more with this, which is shading the beam on which the train or the monorail is running. So we shall basically just get on with that. This area wants to be darker, it needs to go all the way across, and I need to do all this area up here as well. We shall see how far we get on. This is likely to be a bit of a shorter stream tonight, I'm afraid, because I have some other stuff I need to get on with. So we may very well finish around about 9:30 today, instead of the more usual 10 o'clock. But that all depends on me noticing the time. And if I don't, we may go on a bit longer than that, but we shall see. So I kind of like, well, first of all, I'm going to change my glasses. I've forgotten again, and then I kind of like the catchphrase, so I'm going to use it. I'm just that way sort of inclined. There's sort of a slightly appropriate catchphrase from a film, which sort of fits and just amuses me a little bit. You can tell, little things, as they say. That catchphrase, if you haven't worked it out by now, is "Heat 'em up," which of course those of you that enjoy Ghostbusters will recognise. I, however, am only heating up a little pyrography tool, not a nuclear reactor powered beam thing, generator, whatever it is. I can't remember quite what they call it. Right. Get rid of the hairs. I don't want hairs, just mainly because it smells terrible. Now, I don't have to be too worried about going over the line at the bottom, because the bit that's underneath the beam is darker, and being darker, it means it's darker. Which means if I've gone over the edge in a light colour, the underneath is darker, it won't be noticed. Might sound obvious, but knowing where you can go over the line and where you can't just sort of makes life easier when you're doing this sort of thing, in that you don't actually have to sort of spend time, being really careful going up to a line that you can go over without there being any problems arising from it. Okay, there'll be some minor difficulties, and that's just associated with trying to even out the tone, but by far the going over the line by far outweigh, the advantages of being able to do that outweigh the little bit of extra effort that you need. Cat hairs, sorry about that. I've had the female cat on my knee most of the day. I don't quite know what it is, whether it's the weather, but that must be, this period of her sitting on my knee. It's got to be the first time in 10 years, or at least a goodly number of years, that she's sat on my knee. Not only that, she's come up to the office or the studio here to actually find me to do that. Excuse me a second, guys. Sorry about that. I actually pushed the wrong button. I meant to just mute the microphone, but that one did as well. Your turn. Okay. So I'm darkening this bit off here, which is kind of in shadow because this bit here needs to be lighter. Or at least this part here needs to be darker. The transition between the two. So that you actually see the contrast between the what would be the darker area and the lighter area. Now the whole lot doesn't necessarily have to be that dark. It kind of, your eye can be fooled a little bit. Not too bad. This is kind of about the almost the lightest shade I can get. Fluffy Twiglet, what did you order? Could it be? Oh no, it couldn't possibly be paper making equipment and chameleon pens. Nah, you wouldn't do that. Don't think so. Nah, I've no idea. Just07, good evening, and Tutti Frutti, good evening. Welcome to the studio. I reckon we ought to. Mind you could have also bought a camera lens. I reckon you ought to, when they arrive, Fluffy Twiglet, give a demonstration. Cats arrive at a rate of knots and then suddenly stop. The funny bit is when they try and stop on something that's not as solid as I thought it was, like a piece of paper on the desk, and they keep sliding. Then you see them scrabble all sorts of ways and it gets quite funny. Luckily, well, not so luckily, because he bounced on top of my computer. Hopefully it didn't jar the hard disks. But then he's got a desk end to come to contend with, so he kind of has to stop really quickly. Hopefully you're wanting to get over there via this. We've got a visitor. Okay. He's looking for a way to get to where he was a moment ago. So he's going to come past the camera, maybe with a bit of luck. Yeah, there you get to see the tail and his back end. He's been sitting on my painting desk behind me, pushing everything off as he lays down. I thought the idea of bank accounts was to keep money in them. I suppose it's to spend them occasionally, but nah, he's not quite that big, Tutti Frutti. Actually, he's not the biggest. Junior, that was Felix. Junior, when he's around, he's not even a big. He's a chunky cat. He's a thick cat. He's got a lot of muscle. So he would be the largest one if he turned up. Although when you see the two side by side, you kind of couldn't really tell that. It's only when you pick them up that you discover one is somewhat heavier than the other. Now that's going to do its usual trick, so I shall now just do the other direction. The usual trick being that if you try and come on from the edge, you always get a darker mark. If you go off the edge, you don't usually get that same mark. So as I'm not looking for a dark edge, I just want to go from on the board to off the board. And there was a cat here. Probably just a small one, and I didn't see it, but it doesn't half smell unpleasant. So I'm just going to give the tip a clean, because it'll carbon, the hair will carbonise. So, and that has some effects that, or it often has some effects that you don't want. So just a matter there. This is normal kitchen paper, and as you can see, it doesn't immediately set it on fire. I didn't necessarily mean the paper making. I was more referring to it's a camera. I was more referring to the pens and stuff, but paper making, you don't need to move. All you need is a long USB cable for the camera. That's at 5 volts. It's a relatively safe voltage for use with around water. And in any case, I wouldn't suggest dunking the camera. But yeah, no, I'd love to see it, to be honest, but you know, but that's not suggesting that you do anything which might be considered risky or anything like that. That would be silly. But no, some art with paint. Now the nice thing of pyrography compared, well, you can do this a little bit with things like airbrushing, but generally speaking with pyrography I can just go over the top of this and all that happens is it goes a little bit darker, which kind of maintains the contrast between the areas that I'm working on here and there's areas that I've already done, so I can literally almost go straight over the top, which you can't usually do with paints, for example, or pens or stuff like that. You can't exactly do it with airbrushing either, but it sort of works. So all I'm doing here is adding a really light colour. The pyrography changes the surface texture a little bit. It's basically ironing the wood, so it changes the surface texture, changes the reflections, and it does colour very slightly. So I do, even if I wanted white, I do tend to apply a little bit of pyrography even to areas that I want white, because it sort of shows up as an area that has been, I can't quite know what the word tense is, pyrographied, but you've applied heat to it. You can kind of see it, areas that have been and areas that haven't. And they tend to stand out a little bit if they haven't had, if you haven't gone over it with a with some form of heat it tool. So I've just sort of applied some colour. I'm going to probably just add sort of random parts like this. Just around it, just add a little bit of texturing in at some point anyway. I may not do that just yet. We are, this is supposed to be a concrete beam, so it would be nice to add a little bit of texture, which may or may not be correctly interpreted as concrete, but at least it won't look flat. So this is just kind of a diagonal shadow line. It's kind of wrong technically for the position of the sun, but it looks okay. So it's what you might describe as a bit of artistic license. So now just darkening the shadow off. And also applying a little bit darker shadow again just here, just under the edge of this side skirt or the wing that's on the side, which will help give the impression of it standing away from the beam that it's on, and that's got a bit darker than I wanted it to. Okay. Hi to Fluffy Twiglet's classmate. Welcome to the stream. And yeah, unfortunately, to come into chat, you do need an account on Twitch, although it's free of charge. And there's lots to watch, especially in creative area. So what you are looking at, what the image is of a monorail. It's a monorail from about, well, at least 10 years ago in Disney World in Florida. And this is a representation of an airbrush painting that I did about that long ago, which was one of my first airbrush paintings that I did, and I did that based on using reference pictures of photographs of this train that I actually took whilst I was out there on holiday one year. So I'll show you the image that we're working from, which is that one. So essentially reproducing the same thing in a pyrographic style, and we're working sort of towards that sort of thing. Obviously it's a little bit more challenging in monochrome, but we'll get there. Tutti Frutti, or Tutti Frutti, sorry. Things are a bit slow tonight because that graphic should have come along the same time and hidden the name until the airbrush paints it out. But anyway, welcome. Thank you very much for the follow. So that's what the image is of. We're working, as Fluffy Twiglet has no doubt said, with electrically heated tools to do this, on just a sheet of birch plywood. Birch being chosen because of the light wood and the characteristics of that wood when heat is applied to it. It's a fairly consistent texture across the wood panel, even with the different grain that's in the wood. Some other woods react differently between the darker and lighter areas of the grain. Birch doesn't, so, or not significantly. So it makes it quite a nice wood for doing this on. And plywood, because it's more stable. When you apply pyrography, especially to the whole sheet, it does have a tendency to warp the wood. This side is drier than the back, and therefore it would curl upwards. The plywood, the construction of plywood, actually resists that movement. So that's why we're working with plywood. Thank you, Fluffy Twiglet. Whilst I remember, I'm drinking tea at the same time. So with pyrography, we do quite often apply tricks, I guess. You could describe them as that. We fool, well, optical illusions, I guess, more than anything. So, you know, some areas will look white just purely because the areas next to it aren't. We'll also do other tricks like this, for example, this transition here that you see. If we taper that transition off, this colour here and this colour here can be exactly the same, but it looks darker because you've passed that transition. Your eye doesn't notice it. PMT how? Not sure I understand that, Fluffy Twiglet, but yeah. I drink tea after 6 PM in the UK, because after 6 PM I can't, coffee doesn't taste the same to me. Something weird about me, that before 6 o'clock I like coffee, after 6 o'clock I don't. It just wishy-washy after 6 o'clock, and I make it exactly the same. So I drink tea. Actually, that one tastes a bit wishy-washy as well, but that's probably because I'm not drinking it whilst it's quite so hot. So I shall have to finish it off shortly. There's a little bit too much of a transition just there, so I just want to sort of smooth that area out a little bit. I don't particularly want a transition there at all. And there's some other effects, like you're kind of seeing that shadow all the way up there across, even though there kind of really isn't one on this top. Your eye just follows it up, and your brain puts in a shadow that isn't really there. I am actually going to put one in, but how I see. I'm the other way. Actually, I can drink tea at any time. I normally drink coffee AM and in the afternoon as well. Yeah. If I make coffee, instant coffee, but I make coffee, and yeah, I drink that all day. But literally, and I don't know why it is, 5 to 6, it's okay. If I then make a coffee at 6:05, it tastes. I describe it as like dishwater, very wishy-washy. And so if I want a hot drink, it has to be tea. It's a weird thing. I'm okay with drinking tea most of the day. I can do that, but and it probably, I'm guessing it probably only applies to coffee that I've made. If I go out and buy a latte coffee or something like that, I'm sure I'll be able to drink it quite happily. Okay, and we'll want the top of this beam here to be slightly darker than down at the bottom, if I can arrange that as well. Of course, it's closer to the shadowing item, which obviously is the monorail above it. And shadows closer are darker than shadows further away. If I get too close to the colour of this, then what I'm going to have to do is make the bottom of the monorail darker as well. The place where I work, there's somebody with the same surname as me, which is a relatively uncommon name in the business or the firm that I'm in, and so everybody thinks we're related and we're not. That's another weird one, especially when you go into the same meetings together. Mind you, Fluffy Twiggler, it's a bit naughty of you when your friend hasn't got the ability to reply, unless of course she's busy there. Yeah, she's busy there making an account so she can have words with you. And I bet the really annoying thing is when she throws all those colours together, it works. Just works. I can't do that. If I throw things together, it looks like I've thrown things together. But another sort of person like that, they throw things together and it works. It looks good. The colours are right and everything else. I try that. It looks like somebody upset a Smartie factory when I do it. Colours all over the place. It's odd. Sometimes my colour sense is really good, and other times it's absolutely terrible. And I've got no real concept of why it is one or the other at a particular time. And I just wish I knew. At least then I'd be able to go, I'm not picking anything today. Okay, as I'm looking at that now, yeah, I'm going to need to darken this a little bit, but that should now look very much like this wing is not. It is, you know, standing away from the beam. So I need a little bit more just down here as well, just to distinguish that edge. Yeah, I'm just going to blend a little bit of shadow into there. That's better, it looks natural. Or more natural. And yep, so that, just looking at it, I need to make this a little bit darker just around here. That shadow seems to come down there and then wants to just curve away, so as I mentioned, it's the sunlight is I've kind of drawn this with the sunlight coming in this sort of direction, and yet that angle there is from the sun over here. There's a little bit of confusion, but the technicalities of it don't really come into it. It looks okay. It in theory, of course, the shadow from the main body of the train ought to go out this way, but it kind of looks okay, or looks right coming this way, so that's where I'm going to leave it. If I do change my mind at some point, I can, so that's not specifically a problem. Yeah. Yeah, that does sound impressive as well. Figure drawing of a final year acting student. Real life drawing in movement. Boy, that's hard work, is that? I can't easily draw still life, never mind moving life. And if you're trying to do it when you're doing something like a play, and do it with colours. Takes confidence as well, doesn't it, to take something like marker pens and put that to paper. Wow. Okay, now what I want to do is put this diffuse shadow back in, so I'm going to change pens, turn the heat right down, untangle the wires. Well, I guess it's kind of like you know, that I've said with things like when you make a mistake, you just make it, you just change the story around it. So you know, I guess that's where it comes from, knowing that you know you whilst you're doing the story, your interpretation of it is entirely yours. So if you make a mistake, or what you feel might be a mistake, you just change the story so that it's no longer a mistake, and just carry on from there. If you don't mind doing that and you're happy for other people to see it as well, Fluffy Twiggler, you're quite welcome to do so. I like the bit at the qualification at the end that you don't stream anyway. See, we've got you. You'll be doing it. We'll have you streaming at some point. Wouldn't streaming qualify some way in doing as part of the coursework? I mean, after all, it is a creative medium in its own right, and you know, video production and things like that. Don't know, I'm just guessing. Yeah, this is kind of the shadow of the wire, so what I'm just doing is I want it to fade out or become basically invisible just around this sort of place here. So I want it to just darken it enough around here so you can see it, but you know, it's starting to diffuse out, obviously, because it's a shadow within a shadow. Now I've just got to make this wire here a bit thicker, because now that I've done the colour underneath it, the thickness sort of went away slightly. Still working with quite a cool pen for this, because this pen heats up really quickly, and you can end up with a black line really quickly. So I tend to work just about as cool as this pen will go on this particular controller. You see, there's always a way of explaining things. Okay, I think that will do for the moment on that area. It does need to be revisited. We do need to revisit some of the colouring here on the monorail itself, especially under the body. This is white, so some of the areas around it needs, you know, for that to look white and for this stripe also to look white, they need to be a little bit closer to each other, and the contrast with what's around it needs to be a little bit more. But we'll come back to that. And I'm still looking at this and thinking that the just there is wider than down here, which isn't intended. It was kind of intended to be a simple. So what I might probably do is just take this inner line around a little bit. But what'll happen then is I'll have two lines. So what I'm going to have to do is darken, so that I can sort of lose that line when I add the extra one around it. It's a pity I didn't see that earlier, but it is only just, it's kind of visible because of the two areas either side of it have been shaded. Okay, thank you, Fluffy Twiglet. Okay. I shall take a look later. I can't do it now. But thank you for that. Okay, so what I want to do, I think now, is we'll make the underneath of the beam. So we'll switch back to using the other pen, because this is going to be darker. It's underneath, fairly obviously. The light's coming down. Underneath is going to be darker. I can make it virtually as dark as I like, but I don't want it. I don't want to go ridiculously dark. I unfortunately don't have anything on here that will ideally show the perspective of this. When I do this section at the bottom, which you can just see the lines on, this is sort of a whitish colour, but I can put panel lines on there which will show the perspective, and then you'll see the shape with the beam. Nothing really to do that. There's no joins in it. I did kind of think about putting one in just to force that perspective view, but might do that if we have to, but I'm going to try and avoid it for the minute. One way in which I could do it is to actually put a beam in, sorry, a supporting somewhere like here, for example, and that would then immediately make this look like the underneath, because of, you know, you understand then how a support joins to the beam. You will therefore immediately understand that this is the underneath of it. So that's one way I could do that. We shall see. I need an account before I can look Fluffy Twiggler, and I don't have one. So I can't check for the moment. So I think we'll start at this sort of darkness level underneath. I suppose what I should do, okay, let's try a little bit of it. Yeah, a bit more than that. What I sometimes try to do is make sure that I am using the pyrographic tool in the direction of movement or direction of grain, because then if there's any tooling marks that you get, which is generally sort of streaks, they're in the direction that tells the story that you're after, and they're not jarring. So if I sort of go in this sort of direction, any tooling marks I get will start to tell the story, which is that this is the underneath. A bit harder to do though than just going straight traversely across. What I'll have to do is turn the board upside down in a moment to do the other side of it, because there's no way I can stop directly on the line. I can start reasonably accurately on the line, but I can't easily stop. Is that doing much? A little bit. Taco Sauce 280, not quite. No, it is a monorail, but it's not the bullet train. The bullet train runs on normal rails, albeit very straight ones. This is a monorail from Disney World here in Florida. I'm not playing music at the moment because I have to find some that I like, which can be played without needing to play performance fees. Because music is copyright, and to play it to an audience requires a license to do so, which costs money. If you do that on Twitch, technically speaking, you're breaking copyright laws, and the one thing that Twitch does then is it mutes the recordings, so that they are not, they themselves are not breaking the copyright laws. So I will be looking into it at some point. I will take a look later then, Taco Sauce, thank you. And if indeed that is, and I like the song, or whatever it is that's being played, then I will add it to a list. Which I'm sort of working to at some point. I do want to have some background music, especially for doing things like this. It does help, as you say, it gets a bit too quiet otherwise. But not for tonight. Will there be anything above clouds? I don't know about above. I think intend to put something at the bottom here. I kind of don't want to put anything in front of it, because the way your eye sees it is it's better if it's got something somewhere to move into, and if I put something there it kind of looks like there's something in the way. Clouds in the sky, don't know. It's a possibility, is that one. There's a lot of space there. I've got to sort of maybe think about that. I mean, the interesting thing about this particular board is you can, if I just bring it down a little bit, you've got a little bit of the wood texture that's just there anyway, which sort of resembles cloudish sort of things, sort of. It might just, well, I could just go over pyrography wise and that would just enhance those a little bit. Not really sure. It is something to be considered. I certainly intend to do something at the bottom, because I think this bottom, otherwise it just looks unconnected. It needs something just to ground it a little. Art in Time, hello, welcome, good evening. Yeah, that's not fantastically, I'm not getting a lot of tooling marks, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go across, and then I can always come back and run the tool diagonally and get and that will sort of add tooling marks, and then give that impression if indeed it needs it. This is kind of going to rely on the fact that your eye and your brain almost will automatically expect this to be the underneath, and therefore you will see it that way. Now there isn't actually going to be much of a difference in contrast or shadow. There won't be a shadow underneath as such, because it is in permanent shadow, and you really don't get any extra from the train running over the top. Okay, yeah, good idea, Fluffy Twiggler. It kind of wouldn't take much, and just to sort of go around and leave little bits of area. How long have I been using the technique, this type of pyrography? It's going on for about four years, something like that. So not particularly very long, I guess, and whilst I have been doing it for that long, I haven't done that much. I do a lot of different crafts, arts and crafts. I do 5 different ones on stream, and so I don't do pyrography 100% of the time. And before I started streaming, I did very little pyrography and very little of everything. Streaming has meant that I do 2 hours of art every night, and I am getting a lot more experience of doing all sorts of things. So since I've started streaming, I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 6 pieces, something like that. So, and that's just in a few months, and that's in addition to the scraper board, the punch craft, the carving, and the jewellery making. God, it sounds like I've done a real lot when I say it like that. Now for this to work, I do need this to be sort of recognisably an edge. So we kind of cheat a little bit by just lifting the tool up. I can create a really fine bits in a way like these lines that you see on here have been done. They'll gradually disappear as we add more colour in. The fine edge just in here gives you subconsciously see the edge that way, even though there isn't much difference between the two colours. Reminds me of one of Sydney. I don't know the gentleman, I'm afraid, so I couldn't say. This one is from at least 10 years ago in Disney World. I know they've replaced them with a newer mark at least once since these were running on the beam out at Disney World. So I don't recall who was the designer of these, I'm afraid. But I just like the look of them, which is why I did the airbrush painting in the first place a good many years ago now, and why I suddenly thought when I saw it, hey, I'd love to have another go. Okay, colour's not too bad. I'm going to have to turn it over to come up to this edge. It's easier to do it when or it's easier for me to do it when I can hold the tool that way and run it along the edge. It's not as easy to hold the side of the tool and hold it steady, so I will flip the work. course, there's no rules that say you have to apply pyrography or apply the right way up. You can apply it any way you like. The bigger the board, the harder it is to flip, of course, unless you've got a lot of space. But this is just an A4 board, so don't have a problem with doing that. That's the intriguing question, isn't it, Art in Time? There is, I suppose, well, technically there's two ways of going about it. One is to remove some of the surface. So I can take a scalpel or sandpaper, something like that, and scrape the surface away. And that will work. Yeah, I can sand that down. The colour will go away because the colour sits on the surface. The only thing the problem with doing that is it changes the surface texture of the wood, and so if I go over it again, it will actually look different. It's really hard then to match the texture of the space either side of it, because you've kind of roughed up the wood fibres. There are sort of variations on the removal, and that is if it's a small area, if I heat it up, this works. It's very much like a varnish that sits on the surface, and I can push it around a little bit. So yeah, like these dark areas here, for example, I can heat them up and drag them down, which tends to fade the area that I'm dragging. I'm obviously dragging the darker pigment varnish, however you want to describe it, away from where it was. An area like this, if I wanted to make this go back to this, nowhere on earth will that work. And there is another variation of a similar thing where in principle I could use a solvent, because I say this does sort of sit on the surface, but again, you apply a solvent onto wood, the wood fibres will tend to either swell or the wood pores, as it gets described, open up. That's one of the ways in which you as a woodworker, if you put sanding sealer down on things, which is basically a solvent which opens up with a bit of glue in it, I think. It opens up the pores, and when you sand it, it feels a lot smoother. So if I had to do the same thing again, it changes the surface texture. The usual way in which I will solve it, if I do it, is the picture you're reading because of the contrast between the different shades. So you're reading this as perhaps I suspect that as the lightest area. This is sort of a middle area, sort of a mid-ish. You say lightest next. That's probably the third, fourth, and fifth areas as you reading them dark as you go from light to dark. And you'll be probably reading that as the darkest area altogether, just the stripe. Now, if I made this too dark, for example, and I actually wanted it to be lighter, if I accept that I can't lighten it, I can make it look lighter by putting it next to something that's darker. So if I darken the area that's around it, this will automatically look lighter. Now there's limits. Obviously the black that's there, or the dark colour that's there, is about as dark as I can get, but you do have some variations possible to you. as long as you haven't gone ridiculous. And so I could apply a little bit more here. This would then look lighter. That might require me then to sort of do areas around it, and so you tend to flow across the whole picture. And indeed this is sort of preliminary colouring to some extent that's on here anyway. Some of these areas do need to be a lot darker. This is intended to be quite a colourful blue, and this is white. As you can see at the moment, the contrast between the two is not fantastic, and therefore it doesn't stand out quite so much as it should do. So that's basically the technique of fixing things that go a bit too far. If you really go too far, then this is probably too dark to be able to apply that technique. If I don't want to start and scrape it, which I usually don't, I do two things. One of two things. One is I pick this up and file it and start again. Or the second one is I change the story, which is something I mentioned earlier. And that is, this was intended to be the underneath of the beam. So if that turned out to be darker than I wanted it to be, then I changed the story. It's no longer the underneath of the beam. I would perhaps sneak another bit underneath to be the underneath of the beam, and I think, well, what can that be? It could be, for example, let's say a piece of trunking or something like that, which is down the side, and I could then take a finer tool and just apply, let's say, some join lines to make it look like a piece of trunking which is down the side. I changed the story, the fact that it's darker than I wanted it to be. Well, what colour's trunking? I don't know. Let's make it black. So you can sort of cheat. Fluffy Twiggler. Okay, no problem with that. Thank you for dropping in. I shall look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. And maybe you'll have your pens and have had a play about, and I'll look at what you showed me earlier as well. So that's kind of the way to go about this. I mean, as an artist, I can make this be whatever I want it to be. So whilst I'm working based on an airbrush painting that was based on the photographs that I took when I was there, it can be anything I want it to be. No problem, Martin Time. One of the reasons I like streaming is to be able to answer people's questions like that. The one is to encourage people to actually have a go themselves. Now, I like streaming, and that's a good reason. It's a discussion I was having at work, actually, and with a number of people that create blogs, for example, and it's, why do you do it? And there is a lot of talk about education, about being able to answer questions, sharing knowledge, also. And to be honest, it's kind of like, my answer to it is, I just like doing it, and I could say all these things, but I just like doing it, and I enjoy those things as well. So I'm streaming because I like doing art, but being able to answer other people's questions as well, and chat and tell you what's going on, and makes it more fun. So I'm being a little bit selfish, really. This, by the way, sat on, this is non-slip matte, just on a box I happen to have, which is about the right sort of height. It's so I can tilt this up like this. I know it makes it, you're getting a little bit of glare off the lights, which unfortunately doesn't go away. Mainly because it's a single light main spotlight, which is just above this particular camera up here. But it's a little bit better than the light I had before, and it's actually tilted like this so that I don't get a reflection off the board, which when it's flat I do, and it makes it harder for me to see. The other reason is I can sit back in my chair, which I keep forgetting, and with my back against the back of the chair, because I have a tendency to lean forward, which gives me neck ache and back ache, and then I wouldn't be able to stream. So if I tilt the board up like this as well, it encourages me to sit backwards a little bit and support my back. I keep meaning to try and get out. I actually have an easel, a desk easel. I keep meaning to get it out and just see if I can work with it on there, because that way it would actually hold it at a slightly higher angle. I'd have to rearrange all the cameras again, but it might actually work better for streaming. RG Euphoria. It's all practice. You ought to see my writing, unless I practice and I'll slow down. I can't read my own writing, never mind other people. Sorry, that's another cat. That. Oh no, that is clear. That's the female. Yeah, no, it is all just practice. There's lots of the art forms, and I've done like the airbrushing, like this. When the first attempt was, the first few attempts were interesting, shall we say, and not necessarily what they were intended to be. But it's all just about practicing, and just like you've learned how to use a pen, you can learn how to use one of these as it's just a pen that has a different type of ink, and you can't write, well, you can write fast with this, but turning the heat down means that you can't write fast, you have to write slowly. Can't quite get down to the bottom there. It was more a case of, oh no, what's she doing now? But we've got 3 cats, but 2 of them have been in the studio here for the past week or so. They're coming on an evening, probably because we've been in here most of the time, but they jump up on one or other of the desks and then curl up, and their idea of curling up is to push everything out of the way. Especially when they've curled up, they then stretch out, pushing everything out of the way, so it becomes a case of, oh no, what, they've pushed off again. Where is my accent from? From English descent from his voice, but could be East Coast American. Interesting. East Coast American, eh? Nope, actually it's the genuine article. It's English descent and still English. I'm from the northern part of England, from a county called Yorkshire. Interesting that we sound somewhat like East Coast Americans. I'm terrible at accents, so I wouldn't actually know. I really can't tell where people come from based on accents. I can hear accents, but things like, I don't know, South Africans and Australians tend to confuse me. If somebody tells me an accent is South African, I can believe it, as opposed to Australian, for example. But when I hear them, I can't always distinguish them. And you've practiced to yeah, and to some extent you're proving your own point there, Euphoria, though. It's if most people I've found can draw, for example, or use some form of art material. Well, if you're looking, you're talking about drawing or something along the style where you create an image which resembles real life, shall we say, whether that's, you know, even if I'm thinking about cartoons, you're emulating organic creatures, anime, that sort of thing, even it's science fiction. And then there's the type of art which is abstract, which is a different sort of thing, and some people have more of an affinity for one or the other. But if you're talking about art which is of the realistic style, then my experience of seeing people try is they give up too quickly. They expect, okay, some people will expect to need to practice, but they expect to be able to need to practice for an hour or two, where in actual fact it can take months sometimes, depending on what your expectations are. And a lot of people have, and I'm one of them, and I don't practice enough. A lot of people have an expectation of being able to sort of just take a look out the window and draw exactly what they can see, and that's actually quite hard to do, and it does take many sort of months of practice before people will get to a stage that they think they're doing reasonably well, and that takes a lot of willpower and a lot of confidence to carry on when you're not, you're trying and you're not getting what you expect. Part of the trick with that often is to do something more simplified. And when you take things like painting classes and stuff like that, they will start with things like a cube or a ball, or a cube, well, generally a cube, that sort of thing. So you get the idea of how to draw things and what perspective means, and what, where shadows fall and things like that. So yeah, it takes a long time. Yorkshire, an amazing place with great scenery. Indeed it is. It definitely is. Without wishing to offend anybody, it kind of, there's almost a running joke, which is it gets called God's country. It's the country that God wanted to create, green rolling hills. That and don't really intend anything religious about that, but it can be a beautiful place to be. Yeah, it's probably true, Euphoria, but accents can change really quickly. They really can. mean, if you think, you know, there was a lot of emigration from England and Europe to Australia, for example, and the Australian, you know, which is afterwards, and the Australian accent is a lot different. And I mean, even if you take the example of America itself, you know, as you highlight there, the East Coast, which implies the West Coast is different, and yet it's people from the same country that have migrated across the different states, and each state seems to have its own variation of accents and things like that. So, and that's happened in a lot less time. Can be really interesting things, can accents. There's a lot more pressure on accents these days for accents to disappear to some extent because of the movement of people. These days there is less chance for accents to develop. Accents tend to develop when communities don't have much movement, so you don't bring in other accents to mix and reduce slang. I mean, the Yorkshire itself, and it's not that long ago, the Yorkshire accent, and whilst I accept I've got a Yorkshire accent, it's not what would have been called a Yorkshire accent even something like about 40 years ago. There were people, especially into North Yorkshire, where the Yorkshire accent, and it gets called Broad Yorkshire, but the Broad Yorkshire back then is different to what people will call Broad Yorkshire now. Again, you know, language shifts slightly, but it was almost a completely different language, was the accent. I'm a Yorkshireman. My grandfather sort of spoke a Broad Yorkshire, and when he lapsed into that, I could not understand him. I couldn't follow what he was saying. I couldn't understand the words, and it literally almost was a different language altogether. But ostensibly, it's English. Okay, yeah, RG Euphoria. Have a good evening. Thank you for dropping in. Nice to see you. Hope I'll see you again, but if not, then enjoy your time on Twitch. It has been good. Thank you. Okay, and what I'm trying to do is make this quite dark. But I don't really want to go as dark as these dark lines here. It's going to be about the second most darkest area, I think, on the whole picture. What we do is turn this up a little bit. We'll see how that goes. I'm in time. Thank you very much. It should hopefully then pop up shortly and say, although maybe Twitch is being a little bit twitchy tonight. I noticed earlier an alert took a little while to appear. But thank you for following, if indeed you have. I wouldn't blame him if he did, Euphoria. It's can get quite addictive watching creative streams. I have very rarely watched a game stream since I discovered creative, and it's not long after I discovered it I started streaming. There we go, Euphoria. Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you very much for that. That's most kind of you for following. I do appreciate you doing that. And having time as well. There you go. Thank you very much, both of you. That's most kind. Colour's about okay, I think. So we'll just try and I mean, this is a concrete beam as well, so you'll notice some sort of there's, well, you may actually probably aren't noticing it, but I can. There's kind of a variation in the tone a little bit, just mainly because I'm not being as smooth as I could be. But we are talking about a concrete beam, so it's quite dense concrete that's used there, but it's not, you know, it's not like it's been painted and you know, it's not like a car body or something like that, which is ultra smooth. So if I'm getting sort of grain marks and slight darker areas, I'm not bothered. It kind of just adds to the interest of the texture. Useful type of thing sometimes. Euphoria, it reminds you, it inspires you to develop the talent that you do have, but you haven't practiced and brought out yet. It may well be that you just need to find the right medium for it. It might be sculpting, for example. It might be carving. It might be pyrography or something else entirely. You know, there's glass blowers on creative. There's sculptors. There was a cake decorator. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting any of these are the ideal art, or they're just different forms of art and stuff like that. So, you know, there's the people who make cosplay. There's the people who make models, Warhammer models. That's creative, and the way in which they, you know, change them, if you like, or the way in which they paint them is the creative element, or the art element. So, and the art I care about is theatrical. Okay, but that in itself is quite an art form, isn't it? What the actual acting itself, or the stuff that's used in theatrical, like backdrops. You know, scenery painting, that sort of thing, lighting setups. There's quite a lot in there. I mean, there's quite a heck of a lot of creative stuff in there. Then there's music associated with it as well. So just in the arena of theatrical, there is one heck of a lot of art forms covered. Yeah. I was about to say then, sort of, you know, setting up a lighting rig might not be something for Twitch, but actually it probably would be something like that, you know, especially if there was sort of, you know, a commentary going along with it, if you like. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not that good at acting. I did a little bit at school. I'm not that good at acting. I certainly am not that good at improv. I cannot write. So yeah, I could say exactly the same thing to myself as I've been saying, which is, yeah, it's practice, and it is practice. I mean, I think just said I'm not that good at acting. My personality is one of being an introvert, yet I worked in sales, and I would walk into a room full of people and say hello, walk up to people, talk to them, stand at the front and give a presentation. That's acting. So perhaps I'm better at it than I thought. And sometimes just thinking of things in a different way just gives you that confidence that you can. Mars Bars 87.95. Thank you very much. That's most kind of you for following. You're terrible at art. It's interesting actually. A lot of people interested in theatre are. A lot of musicians are as well. You know, stage musicians. It's interesting. You're terrible at art as well, are you, Mars Bars? Is it that you're only terrible at one art, or is it that you haven't practiced? Yeah, I mean, I will, yeah, I will sort of freely admit that there are some people do find doing some things harder than others, even with practice, and you know, sometimes it is disheartening. But there is generally, you know, if you like, you know, art, as long as you don't think of art as being an oil painting, for example, you know, art is creating a lighting rig. Art is, you know, doing a shooting schedule. You know, there's a lot of creative stuff in there. It is an art, okay, there's a slight overlap or a slight discussion where does art become craft, but almost everybody can do some form of art as long as you don't stick to a very narrow definition of what it is. And most people do think of a very narrow definition. So a lot of people who say that they're terrible at art are thinking about an oil painting or just possibly a pencil drawing, because they kind of equate the same thing. But then when you know, you'll find that they can bake a beautiful cake and they can make it in the shape of a tractor. That's art, but they don't equate that to art because they think of art as being a painting. So Mars Bars, you see, you're doing the same thing. You prefer computers. Do you program computers? That's an art form, especially if you think about graphical user interfaces. But it is an art form. You I'm sure have heard, if you do programming, about elegant programming. There are elegant ways to write a program, and there are not so elegant ways to write a program, shall we say. And doing that, and how you lay out the lines, and whilst you still follow style guides, there's an art form to doing that, which makes it easier to read and all this sort of stuff. So art is a very wide term. Yes, Euphoria. As long as you stick, yeah. If you look at it just from a one particular thing, you know, as I say, like an oil painting or stuff like that. And I will freely agree there are people that can't, and probably will never satisfactorily say paint an oil painting, but they may satisfactorily or even better lay out a flower garden with multiple coloured flowers and things like that. So Okay, but that was just an example, Mazbars. You know, you prefer computers, so you know there are lots of things that are done with computers, but I don't know how you know, learning difficulties impacts with programming, so it's difficult for me to comment any further than that, really. Okay, Euphoria, have a good evening and good luck with whatever art form you try, and thank you for following. XPL, good evening, welcome to the studio this evening. You can't wait to build your new PC, possibly in December. Now that's interesting, you see. Raziers, thank you very much for following, that's kind of you. Because there are people that can't build computers. Now, whether it's a craft or an art, you're picking your own components, you're mixing and matching them, you're going to lay them out in a case, you're going to work out where to put things that look good, no doubt, especially if you, like most people who build them, want to have the inside looking good. Lay out cables, put the graphics card in different places depending on just, I know it has to go in certain places, but you might have a choice. Is it a craft? Is it an art form to make a PC look good when you take the lid off? There you go. What am I doing? What am I trying bending into what? Yeah, it's kind of drawing with heat is the way I describe it, or painting with heat. This is a monorail. It's a monorail that used to run at Disney World probably 10 to 15 years ago. I can't remember exactly when. I know they have replaced them at least once since this particular one was running there. This is an interpretation of the reference image that I'm using, which is an airbrush painting I painted about 5 or 6 years ago, which was of another reference picture, which was a set of photographs that I'd taken whilst I was there of these trains. So this is a Disney World Florida monorail, quite an old model of it. You stuck a toe in your CPU. Strikes me as being really difficult to do without actually breaking it open. But that's me being pedantic about it, because it's kind of a flat piece of silicon in plastic. Here's the CPU. Yep, well there you go. You see, everybody has... if you think about art in a different way, you know, art is something that looks nice and is pleasing to the people that behold it, if you like, if you want to look at it that way. Why can't the inside of a computer be an art form? And I think it really is when you start, especially start with things like water cooling, and you start laying out pipelines and stuff like that, and people do colour matching and all sorts of things. So yeah. You have very strong toes. You must have to get inside a CPU. Alfie Marsh, stop being silly. You're not that far off just being banned. Right, let's just do a little bit more of this. Alfie Marsh, providing you a beer for yourself. Thank you very much. Leave it alone. Alfie Marsh, suggest you change the subject. I don't normally. I'm feeling in quite a good mood tonight because normally I don't give people any warning. I tend to just ban people. So you know, start. The X-Spray. Why would I want to do that? There's lots that come in and do it for free. They don't stay very long, so why would I want to pay anybody to do something like that? Yeah, well that's 99 cents more than the people who do it for free. You're not very good at this, are you? Negotiation wise, you're not selling yourself very well. And now you're offering to do it for free, so it means that you don't have very much confidence in your own abilities, that your time is valuable and that you actually are worth paying. Tyler Boy 1993, thank you very much, that's kind of you. We've got X-Spray here who sort of seriously thinks he's not worth anything, and therefore if you don't think you're not worth anything, why on earth would I think that you'd be able to do what it is that you're promising to do? Kermit Spick. Hello, welcome, good afternoon. Okay, Mars Bars. Most people on Twitch who mod tend to mod for free, so that's an interesting statement. But of course, you do realise that the first the first rule, I guess, of modding is that if you want to mod, then you're no good for modding. The only people that are good that make good mods are the ones that don't want to do it. Now, if you want to be banned X-Spray, you can do, but if you speak in English, then you might not. I see X-Spray. You'll mod for 99 cents a week, and Alfie Marsh will mod for 99 cents a month. Is this going to be a bidding war? In time, yeah. You're not the only one, actually. I'll be going shortly as well. Thank you very much, and hope I'll see you again. Nice to have you around. I'm now wondering what these modifications are that X-Spray and Alfie Marsh are going to make for 99 cents, either a month or a week. So I mean, offering to do a month's work or even a week's work for 99 cents seems like a good deal. But I'm wondering what sort of guarantees they're going to offer. No, you didn't X-Spray. You just drove off the people that would otherwise have been chatting about art because of what you're doing. But as I was due to sort of finish at about 10:30, you see, today, 9:30 today, which is about 20 minutes ago, I've just had fun getting you to carry on with the way that you're carrying on, you see. And you're not selling yourselves very well anyway. You see, you went in the stream earlier. I used to work in both sales and as a buyer. So you know, you're not impressing me. I can. Would you like to do something that actually makes it worthwhile? I mean, after all, you know, I've got to reach out and I've got to push a button. You know, it takes effort. And so far, I see Alfie Marsh. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of judicial people very interested in that statement. Of course, because not only is it illegal in just about every single country going that I know of, just about. It also says quite a lot about you, which you probably aren't really intending to do. And since I think he's still under prosecution, then there'll be a lot of people wondering why you're hiding a fugitive. I guess also that would be unlawful imprisonment as well. You can't even get that right. Oh dear. What is that supposed to be? See, you're making an assumption. You're making an assumption that the chat window is only so wide, and it isn't. My chat window is almost 2,000 pixels wide. I've seen punch tapes out of old teleprinters that are more interesting than that. Ah dear. You see, you're trying to do something and you're just totally failing. You do realise that what you're trying to do there is against Twitch terms and conditions, aren't you? Because it's an attempt to incite racial hatred. And that can get you permanently banned. Your nuts are 200 pixels wide. And on some displays a pixel is about a micron, so that's about 200,000ths of an inch. Probably about right. I can make you mad quite easily. because what I can do at this point is say to everybody else who's probably laughing, thank you very much for watching. I've been having some fun with these two that are trying to be annoying and are just failing completely, and I'm going to annoy them even more at the moment. So apart from that, when I'm normally doing art, if you would like to see it again, feel free to follow. I would appreciate that. On the other hand, you can follow me on Twitter if you just like the notification. The details will be in the on the end plate in a moment. It's @ZaragonArt. On the other hand, if you just want to try and catch me tomorrow, it's at 8 PM UK time, 1900 hours GMT, or about 2 hours ago. These two people who are being really boring and only slightly funny now are going to be annoyed because I'm not going to ban them. I'm just going to close the stream. Bye bye.